explore emotional sobriety with you. It's also known as the next frontier. That's what Bill Wilson referred to it as. A little bit about me that's helpful for this journey tonight. First thing, I work at Caron Wernersville on the teen and young adult male units. So I get to have a lot of fun during the days. And I also have a lot of work cut out for me, which is good. But I've been so lucky to work with so many awesome families. The other piece about me is that I am in family recovery myself. And so initially, when I started learning, sorry. When I first started learning about emotional sobriety, I was like, this isn't really my deal, right? And then as I started reading about it, I was like, oh my God. I had kind of that moment where I was like, oh. So, and just
all right, well, I have another seminar at 7 o'clock here.
Just a quick reminder to stay on mute. I will ask you guys to unmute at different times. But please, for now, just stay on. I'll let you know when you can unmute. So let's talk about what emotional sobriety is. Let's jump right into it because it took me, honestly, a little while to figure it out. And it seems as I started to break it down more and more, I was like, this is actually pretty simple, but it took a while. I'm not going to say how long, but more than I'd like to admit. So Tiana Dayton calls emotional sobriety our ability to live with balance and maturity. Our thinking, feeling, and behavior are reasonably congruent, not held captive by any of them. I really liked this idea of congruency. It makes me think of water, and you guys will see that theme come up quite a bit. And so I oftentimes think about water and the congruency of it a lot of the times. And I found that really helpful as I was thinking about emotional sobriety. Another thing that I thought of a lot was keeping the connection between our mind, body, and spirit alive. I think so often we can get into a routine and we can get busy with our lives and we forget that things have to stay in tune. Things have to go, we have to keep everything kind of our ducks in a row, if you will. And this is just a good reminder of that. And then another way to break it down is being present and responsive, not chaotic and reactive. I, at first, when I thought about emotional sobriety and the lack of emotional sobriety, hearing the words chaotic and reactive, I was kind of like, I had that moment that I think probably many of us have from time to time where we're like, oh no. But it was helpful to reframe it in this way. How much more can we break it down than that, you know? So moving from a place of chaos and reaction to a place of being present and being responsive. So that is what we're gonna be unpacking tonight. A good thing to also kind of know before we talk about emotional sobriety is that there is a difference between emotions and feelings. This was another one of those thinkers for me, because my background is in social work and not in psychology. And so, oh, sorry, and just sorry, y'all, we're having some issues. So when I talk about emotions versus feelings, I think this is really important because so often we think to ourselves like, well, I have to be able to talk about how I feel. I have to be able to express my emotions. And that's very true. And I think sometimes they get lumped together and we don't always know the difference. So when I talk about emotions, they are more primitive. They're that hardwired response that we have, those neurochemical reactions from stimuli. And I don't want to get all like neurobiological as I can tend to do, because I am not a neuroscientist, but I think what's important here and the distinction is we feel our emotions automatically. So if something is running at me, I'm going to feel fear. If somebody cuts me off in my car, I might feel rage. If I experience a loss, I'm gonna feel grief. When I look at my cats, I feel love. Feelings are what happened to us when we process those emotions. So when I see a person running at me and I feel scared, I might be like, what in the world? And feel like affronted by it, right? When somebody cuts me off, I might immediately feel rage and then be like, all right, that made me a little upset, but I can deal. So it's processed by the thinking part in the brain. I was so fascinated to learn that emotions and feelings operate out of two different parts of the brain. That to me was really like one of those things that you learn and you're like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And so the other part about feelings are they're the conscious experience of emotional reactions. So we hold emotions in our body and we feel them organically, and then we experience them through feelings. So they can include physical reactions, so like feeling hunger, feeling pain. And that's a big distinction between feelings and emotions. So we have feelings like sad, mad, glad, scared. Okay, thanks, Corey. But before I move on to the next slide, I just wanted to see if there are any questions or comments about the distinction between emotions and feelings. All right, if there are, feel free to keep them coming. So that being said, now that we know that we're talking about emotions, we're talking about that physical reaction, that automated reaction, I think it's helpful to really unpack what emotional sobriety actually looks like. It is impossible to abstain from emotions. And I think that that's a really important distinction when we talk about sobriety from substances and emotional sobriety. We are not going to be able to turn off our emotions. I think and what I feel like emotional sobriety is really talking about is learning how to develop some self-regulation around those emotions. So really working on developing those skills, being able to maintain perspective. The other day on the way home from work, somebody did cut me off. They actually went around me on a turn lane, and it totally freaked me out. And I got like super angry, and I was like, what in the world? I said some other things that I'm not going to say on this screen. But as I started to like do some breath work and calm down a little bit, I was like, man, if somebody's driving like that, there's a chance that there's an emergency for him. And so that is, I think if I were to have a lack of emotional sobriety, I would have sped up right behind him, been tailgating him, being like all up in his business. But being in emotional sobriety, I was able to say, hey, let me take a minute and think about what he's going through. Let me get some perspective here. It's also the ability to live in the present moment, being able to, and I don't think anybody, maybe the Dalai Lama, maybe some other folks, I'm not sure, but I don't think that many people in the world are really able to sit and be super present all of the time. I think that it's a practice, and it's more, instead of the ability to live in the present, I wish I would have put here the ability to come back to the present moment. So we are going to wander, especially when we're dealing with intense situations, when family members or our loved ones are getting on our nerves. We're going to future trip. We're going to have those moments where we're feeling scattered and overwhelmed, and it's the practice of coming back to the present. It also means the ability to live with connection. So finding people that you can connect with, and being able to have authentic relationships with them. Resilience is another big piece of emotional sobriety, which I love. I think resilience is super important. I think oftentimes people think of resilience as being able to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and to kind of grin and bear it. And to me, resilience means really being able to wade through some murky waters. Resilience looks like being comfortable with the color gray and not always needing black and white. Another aspect of emotional sobriety is owning and processing painful emotions. There's a great book, I forget what it is. I'll have to get it to Corey so you guys can, I always do this. I quote books without thinking about it, but she talks about how we try to evade pain. we are constantly faced with the decision to either run away from our pain or to modify it and make it something beautiful. And so I think that that is what is asked of us when we're asked to go on this journey of emotional sobriety. I think it's equally as important to know what emotional sobriety does not look like, or maybe if there's a lack of it. So I think that this includes a difficulty with self-regulation. You know, if I had gone after that gentleman and tailgated him and got angry at him, you know, I wouldn't have been regulating my emotions. I think when we can't self-regulate, there's a lot that goes into that, right? Some people, that area in their brain does not work. Some people it does work and they haven't built those muscles, and other people just struggle with it a little bit. It's a really hard thing to really master, and it takes a lot of practice. I think the biggest piece with self-regulation is that willingness to pull yourself out of the situation and kind of get that kind of become an observer, not to take things in so personally. And we're going to talk about that. I also think it's an inability to put strong emotions into perspective. When you feel rage, do you feel rage for a long period of time? Are you unable to pull yourself out of the situation and see another perspective? Are you constantly in that victim mentality? An inability to live or come back to the present. An inability to live comfortably in intimate relationships. Do you find yourself pushing people away, keeping people that are really kind to you and care about you at a distance, but those people who are chaotic and reactive, you keep them close because that's what you're used to. It's a lack of resilience. So maybe it's where you think of things so black and white to the point where no gray can exist. There's no murky waters. It either has to be clear or it's not even water. And a tendency to try to evade painful emotions. So I think you're sensing, you might be sensing, I hope you're sensing a theme here where emotional sobriety is that responsiveness, that ability to hit the pause button in life a little bit. A lack of emotional sobriety is full throttle all the time, feeling everything to the 10th degree, not being able to get perspective. To put it like this, I think of a lack of emotional sobriety as a reaction, and then emotional sobriety is a response. Chaos as a lack of emotional sobriety, and calm emotional sobriety. This doesn't mean all the time. It just means the majority of the time you're able to keep the peace. As I was thinking through this, I was like, I love metaphors, probably too much, but I was like, what can I use here? Some more information about me. I grew up at the beach, so I'm very friendly with the ocean. I know it very well. And when I think about calm and peace, I think about the ocean. And now when we look at this picture, it's like, that is not calm. I would not go near that. But what I mean when I meant when I chose this picture was that you're able to kind of roll with the tides. They come and go. The ocean does what it's going to do. It still feels things. It still has moments. There's still massive waves and big crashes on the beach. And it always goes back to the same rhythm. It always goes back to the same thing. When I think about and thinking about the opposite of the ocean, I think of a volcano, something that's explosive, unpredictable. There's all these chemical reactions going on underneath of the surface. There's a lot of analyzing. There's not the ability to just roll with the tides. And so you'll see this theme of the ocean coming up time and time again. And it's helped me to have that kind of visualization when I do feel really escalated, when I do feel like reacting, having that mental picture of like, all right, get with the rhythm of the ocean. So I love this quote. I'm a big Melody Beattie fan. Who isn't, right? I mean, my goodness. But she says, it is normal to react and respond to our environment. Reacting is part of life. It's part of interacting, and it's part of being alive and human. but we allow ourselves to get so upset and so distracted. Little things, big things, anything have the power to throw us off the track. And the way we respond after we react is frequently not in our best interests. I think that that is just such an important quote, because I'm very into normalizing things. And if you've sat in FEP with me, or if you've done therapy with me, you know that one of the biggest things that I'm going to say is be gentle with yourself, be kind to yourself, have grace with yourself. If you are a person who has reacted in life, you're not alone. I think everybody reacts, and it's kind of our journey as humans to learn how to move from reaction to responsiveness. Some of us are able to do that early in life. Some of us need some more time. And there's a lot of reasons, which we'll talk about in a moment, why we learn how to become reactive instead of responsive. And that can happen through life. For me, I was born into a house of reactive people. I was reactive coming out of the womb, and I was reactive really until I got to college and started learning how to lighten up a little bit. And so if you find yourself sitting here and you're like, gosh, that's me, I am reactive. I do have a lot of chaos around me. Deep breath. We're going to get through this together. So how does it start? How do we start these processes of becoming reactive? Because I want to move out of, and if you're comfortable with the language of emotional sobriety and lack of emotional sobriety, that is totally fine. For me, I kind of align with reaction and responsiveness a little bit more. That feels more comfortable for me. But however you want to view it, please take in what works for you. And I'll use the words interchangeably. So how does this start? One way that it could have started is we've had a difficult or complicated attachment with a caregiver. I know Meredith talked about this a lot last week, but if our caregiver is super reactive and constantly yelling and constantly agitated and huffing and puffing, we're probably going to take some of that on too. The interesting thing is oftentimes in those relationships, we see the reactiveness, we model the reactiveness, and then we get in trouble for the reactiveness. So there's no coping skills being taught. There's no other option. It's just this cycle of reaction over and over again. And with that, I think we internalize the message, I am difficult. I cause reactions in people. I am chaos. Another way that it could start is reaction and chaos. So reaction and chaos is modeled for us. That's all that we have seen. I think too, if you have parents, or you had a parent or are a parent who was maybe super avoidant, reactions might have been the only way to get attention. Having a reaction or an episode or an outburst might have been the only way that you knew how to get connection. When you weren't reacting, when you weren't flying off the handle, when you weren't in crisis mode, there wasn't a lot of support. Tian Dayton says, who we are surrounded by as children and how we are seen and treated by those remains with us as a template through which we see ourselves. I think that's so important, and it's so true. We really are taught how to model things, and oftentimes we get in trouble for those things, and we aren't taught anything different. So this is another way where we really need to start being really gentle with ourselves. Maybe you are a parent of somebody and you have been reactive in the past. What I don't want is for you to walk away from this presentation with shame. Earned guilt is fine. Owning the fact of, hey, I've been this way and I'm going to make changes, that's great. But I invite you to lay your shame down, because you were taught this one way of surviving. And you can't change that. You can't change how you were taught to survive, but you can change how you continue to thrive. Another thing that often happens, maybe you or those that you love had a great childhood, had great attachments with your family members, had wonderful things happen in life. And then a crisis occurred in your family or among friend groups, whatever it was. So it could be we have been living in a state of crisis for a long enough period that all we know is reaction and chaos. And I put, trauma. Trauma is, I think, a really hot topic right now. And I'm actually like pretty glad for it. I think a lot of people are like, great, everybody's calling everything trauma now. And my response to that is often, well, good. Maybe we're gonna have a world where people are able to stop being volcanoes and start being the whole damn ocean. Maybe we're gonna have worlds where people can breathe a little bit lighter. Melody Beatty says, many of us react as though everything is a crisis because we have lived with so many crises for so long that crisis reaction has become a habit. I can remember very vividly when my sister was going through her substance use disorder crisis. I was leaving college and moving across the country and moving back to the East Coast within a matter of months. And I took on these jobs literally at crisis intervention units in counties here in Pennsylvania. And I thrived. I was doing so well during those moments, but then I would go home and I would completely fall apart. At work, I was a rock star. I knew what to do. I knew how to do it. I was on, any on-call calls, I was so happy to get. It felt natural and normal to me. Put me behind the scenes and I was miserable. I didn't show up for things. I didn't let people get too close to me. I would take everything personally. And I think that's because I learned how to thrive in a state of crisis. If you're on this call, you probably have lived through a long period of crisis too. The good news is just being here, showing up every week, you're doing something about it. And that's a beautiful thing. This picture here is a little blurry, but it was so perfect that I just could not let it go. So I tinkered with it a little bit and I left it, but we'll get to that in a minute. So obviously there's a connection to emotional sobriety and substance use disorder. We've got Bill Wilson, who's coining the term. We've got the fact that it's a huge part of recovery for a million different reasons. Some might say, it's that new frontier, that the next step after early recovery. And so oftentimes if people have substance use disorder, they're really good, shockingly, at evading big emotions. I've worked with a kid who would give me 10 minutes in my office and then I would start getting into some stuff, getting a little uncomfy for him. And he'd be like, I'm going to go now. He'd get up and he'd walk out. And it's very easy when you're using substances to run away from big emotions. It's very easy when your loved one is actively using substances to run away from big emotions. Substances also provide a way to try to self-regulate. I feel like I heard a really good lecture through Insight, another treatment center, and the gentleman speaking said that drinking and drugging is oftentimes somebody's best way of coping with something, and it's saved them and helped them survive through many things, and now it's going to kill them. And I think about that a lot because it's so true. Modeling, again, if we saw our family members reach for the wine bottle, reach for the cigarettes, reach for whatever it was when they were feeling stressed, we learned that substances take away that stress. My mom was a smoker, she still is. And that is her go-to thing. Well, I'm going to go outside. I'm going to go outside. And, eventually we got curious about that as kids and we saw it happening. And then it was this moment of like, well, if I ever catch you smoking, it's going to be over. The reality is that modeling means so much, so much. I also read a very interesting article about this idea of a spiritual bypass. So sometimes individuals who are in early recovery from substance use disorder can kind of ride that pink cloud a little bit. they get into that space of like, everything's going to be fine. You know, my higher powers got it. And there is a lot of that that's super great. And I love that. And also we got to keep the earth below our feet a little bit. It can also, spiritual bypass kind of can be like that self-righteousness. You know, I'm staying calm all the time because my higher powers got me. What's going on with you that you're feeling these big emotions? Where really that individual might be stuffing some stuff down. They might not be working through everything that they need to work through. There's also this tendency to intellectualize instead of being willing to unpack things. You know, there's that process of, I have substance use disorder. It's a disease. I just need to abstain. I'm going to be fine. I've got a lot of people in my family like this who know they have a disease. They decided to become sober and then they never talked about anything ever again. And as soon as anything came up, it was, I can't handle this. I'm not going to do this. I can't handle this. And so there's that tendency to intellectualize and say, nope, I've got it. And so I loved this comic when I saw it, when it's this person here and they've invited out a couple emotions like excitement, joy, and euphoria, or as I like to call them, the fun ones. This is the gang that you want like hanging out with you. But over here in the corner, there's the unwanted box of emotions and it's saying, let us out, and cursing a little bit. Those are all of the other emotions that a person experiences. If only it was that easy, right? If only we could just put our emotions in a box. But as you guys heard earlier, we can't do that. Emotions are things that happen sometimes. So before I move on, I just want to see if there are any thoughts or questions. I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you. All right, if there is anything, please let me know. I am certainly not an expert in emotional sobriety. I'm just another person on the journey. Oh, and it looks like we do have a question. Corey, for some reason, I am unable to open my chat feature. Are you able to see that at all?
Sure. It said, Nancy asked, can you re-explain spiritual bypass?
Yes, definitely. So spiritual bypass is like taking a little, so it's like, imagine you're driving in a car and you come up and you see a sign that says big emotions ahead. Spiritual bypass is like taking the first exit that says pink cloud, everything's fine here, and kind of going on that route instead of going through the difficult emotions. I think it's that ability to say, my higher powers got it all worked out. I'm fine. Everything's okay. You know, also, I think there can be a lot of shame and guilt tied into that with other people where it's like, if you were connected enough to your higher power, then you wouldn't be experiencing rage. So it's this tendency to kind of stay in that area of spirituality and use it, not as a tool and not as true connection, but use it to kind of push away everything else that's hard. Let me know if that was helpful or if anybody else had any.
That was very helpful. Thank you. I got it now.
Good, good. Spiritual bypass can be a defense. Yes, Meredith, thank you. See, it's good we have her on here. How do we access this session later? I see it's being recorded and would like to listen again. I believe Corey is going to send it out.
I will, yes.
Awesome. All right, so if there are no more questions, I will keep moving along. We're going to talk about the hard work. So this is the fun part of the presentation, and I am, in my true fashion, going to get you guys to interact. You'll see I found a nice picture here of both the ocean and a nice volcano, because there is this scary transformation that I think we all have to make. And I don't know about you, but I would not want to be these folks up here hanging out. This does not seem appealing to me, just like the hard work of emotional sobriety, but it's worth it. So the first thing is getting honest and preparing for meaningful action. So just like any 12-step program, the first step is always recognizing that there's a problem. Recognize the ways that you've been reactive. I read a lot of different books to prepare for this presentation, all by women, which was very cool. Sorry, guys. But every single book that I read talked about taking the moment to pause and reflect on the ways that maybe you've been reactive in life. Maybe the ways that you haven't been able to kind of take a deep breath and get perspective. Including the things that you've taken personally. I think so often we take so many things personally in life and we don't even recognize it. We don't even stop to recognize it. My first instinct as a person who was raised by reactive people is to always jump to, well, that person must be jealous of me. Well, that person must just hate me. Again, using the car analogy, here I am driving in my little Prius on my way home from work. I'm a nobody. And this gentleman comes up behind me. And my first thought is, he must not like Priuses. Nope. That does not matter. I highly doubt that somebody would tailgate somebody because of that reason. But that's, I think, recognizing, hey, my first instinct is to start to take things a little personally. I could give you 1,000 examples that would embarrass me forever about how I take things personally. But I think it's important to hit that pause button and explore. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to share the things you take personally. Learn to recognize your patterns. This can be another thing that's really, really difficult to do. But I think when I ask you to hit the pause button, I mean it in several different ways. One of the biggest ways I think I mean it is to maybe even take a whole day and to say, I'm not going to really work too hard. I'm not really going to plan a bunch of things. I'm just going to observe how I move through the world. You're going to become like a Nat Geo reporter following yourself around. That sounds crazy. It might be a little bit. So warn your family. But I think learning, like when I wake up, what's the first thing I think about? Am I thinking about other people? And then am I getting resentful about how I have to make breakfast for the whole family? Am I making time to do things I enjoy? Am I making time to build connection? How am I engaging my mind? So just getting curious about what things look like for you. I know that we all push self-care a lot. And I think that sometimes taking these moments for a nice pause can really show us like, wait a minute, how did my week go? What did I do to actually help myself this week? Did I do anything? Was it effective? Are the things that I have been doing still helpful for me? I like to practice this on a nice Saturday, sometimes a Sunday, but a nice Saturday. Maybe I have something planned, maybe I don't. But I like to reflect on my whole week and just think about the ways that I've adjusted, the ways I haven't adjusted, where I've reacted, where I haven't. And obviously, if you're new to this process, it's going to be that moment where you sit with yourself and only yourself and just say, like, did I possibly engage in behaviors that weren't in line with what I want to be doing? Was I reacting more than I was responding? Did I involve myself, or was I in this like little chaos bubble more than I would have liked to? And get curious about that. I was reading another book recently. I think that should be my tagline here. I think it was about Japanese culture and how when something comes up in Japanese companies, they don't seek to blame somebody. They just kind of manage the problem. And I thought that was that's amazing. I think, when somebody is lacking emotional sobriety or they're reactive, it can be really easy and comfortable to blame somebody. Again, we're trying to take away feelings of discomfort, feelings of shame, feelings of embarrassment, whatever it is, and move it on to somebody else. We're trying to evade any type of pain. So when we can kind of sit with it and kind of pull blame out of the equation, what we have left is a response. Sometimes. So that piece is, this piece of pausing and getting honest is really important, and continuing to do it as needed. Melody Beattie in Codependent No More talks about how every time she finds herself being reactive, she reflects on it and she asks, was I reactive? Why was I reactive? What was happening? What was I feeling in my body? And it's a whole process that she goes through. I think that's fine to do too, whatever works for you. But I'd love to hear from you guys to see if there are experiences where you noticed yourself hitting a pause button and what that felt like. So if anybody has a story of a time they hit a pause button and wants to share.
Hi, I'm Jenny. Thank you, Taylor.
Yes.
This stuff is my jam. I love it.
Yay.
Thank you so much. You know, I began. I left Caron in mid-September, and I began this process of learning how to observe myself. And a lot of that came through with the mindfulness practice, but I found it very entertaining sometimes, because if a person can get to the point where you actually do pause, like you're saying, and I'll go, why am I angry? And then I go, well, maybe I'm not really angry. I'm just irritated or frustrated or whatever. And, you know, it might take you an hour or a day or more, but then you go, I wasn't really angry, you know? And so it's kind of entertaining. It's almost like you're stepping outside of yourself a little bit. And it also, it makes so you can diffuse not only yourself, but a potential engagement with someone that would not turn out well.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. That's so awesome.
Anyway, thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, Jenny, thank you so much. I think that that's so true. And I always think of, I find it helpful to think of myself as like a little kid, like getting upset and like stomping my foot. And then like, you know, adult Taylor is here and supposed to be like, yo, what's going on?
Yeah.
What's happening? And I think a lot of us didn't get that when we were younger, right? We didn't get that question of, hey, are you okay? What's up? Instead, we got, hey, stop, knock it off, stop crying. I'm going to give you something to cry about, right? And so when we can kind of pull back and give ourselves what we needed all along, it can be really healing. Oh, it looks like we got something in the chat. I'm going to try to get my mouse working here. Today, my son in treatment was freaking out a bit. I listened, gave him a few suggestions to help himself, which maybe I shouldn't have, but I allowed myself to let it go and not dwell on it and let it go. Letting it go brought me peace. Oh my gosh. Yes, Denise, that's awesome. Yeah, so you gave him what you could. It sounds like you didn't feel like you were crossing your own boundaries. You weren't going above and beyond. You weren't exhausting yourself. And then you got perspective. You were able to kind of step back from it and say, it is what it is. They'll be all right. I'm choosing to be at peace. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So true. You can only control your reaction, but so hard, but freeing. Absolutely. Surrender and acceptance are cornerstones. Yes. All right, let me get my mouse working again here and we'll move right on. So the next thing is...
Hi, Taylor.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Jenny. I have my hand up. I don't know if you guys can see that. I just wanted to share something. I was at Caron about a month and a half ago, and I just loved you. I really did. I don't know if you remember me.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yes.
Hi. Oh, it's just been awesome. And I wanted to share the fact that by going through the process, being at Caron, learning, right? The whole, what I'm getting from what you're talking about is learning to listen. And you know, of course, stepping back, but taking the time. When I hear pause, that speaks listening to me and to others when you're in a, you know, when you could react. And I've experienced a lot of that since I left Caron. It's just stopping, pausing, listening for the first time. And I think that works really well with this.
Yeah, that's amazing. That is such a good choice of words. Listening, listen. When we stop and listen to ourselves, and even just say, like, ask ourselves, why am I angry? And just allow ourselves to answer that, to hear it, and to listen to other people. Like, oh, that's a beautiful thing. Thank you for sharing that. That's some good stuff.
I miss you guys, and Meredith too. Oh my gosh, I'm so happy to be here.
We missed you. We're happy you're here.
Thanks.
Yeah. So the next part of the hard work, I'm gonna have to give my mom some props, because she did teach me this one. It's unpack your backpack. And this is another little funny thing that I saw, this backpack called emotional baggage. And my mom always tells me that in life, we all have these little backpacks on. And we fill our backpack with different things, some good, some bad, and we carry it around with us. And sometimes our backpacks get really heavy. Many of us are walking around like, you know, those middle schoolers where they're taking every single book home because they don't really know how to work their locker and they're just trying to do their thing. Many of us are walking around like that. And it's because we don't know what to do with our stuff. We don't know how to use our locker. And so unpacking our backpack really means dismantling those internalized messages from childhood. All of us have received them. One of the big ones that to get pretty deep here, one of the big ones I got when I was little was, you are so dramatic. You are too much. And yes, I love a stage. I am dramatic. But when you internalize that and take that in over and over and over again, it can feel damaging. And so the process of unpacking that, of allowing myself to feel the pain of that and not take that as the truth anymore, is a huge thing. And so we have to go back to those places that terrify us, that scare us a lot, and work with them. Gabby asked, exactly how do you explore your trauma? Been in recovery for 14 years. I've been working on this for years, but it's still there. Yes, I'm in therapy. There are so many great ways to explore trauma. I definitely recommend the book, The Body Keeps the Score, if you're into that sort of thing. But also, I think one of the most healing ways to explore trauma, and I am not trauma certified, so take this with a grain of salt. I'm saying that right now. I just have an MSW. Art. Get it out there. And it could be scribbling, it could be drawing, it could be writing, dancing, singing, whatever it is. But express it. Trauma lives in the body like a ghost. And our best way of getting it out is by putting it out. You might still have those feelings where you're living with it, but when you can put it out there on a piece of paper, even if it is just a scribble with pen, and you can know, like, hey, that's my trauma. It's out there now. There it is. It can be so cathartic and healing. I've also seen a lot of people engage in things like yoga, movement, psychodrama or acting, things like that. And I think it really depends on the person, but finding that thing where you can explore your trauma in a way that feels safe and right for you. I think obviously working with a therapist is super important, and finding other people who get what it's like to be where you are. So coming to groups like this and talking about your trauma. And the reality is it's something that's always, it's going to live there with you. Animal therapy, yes, yes. Dogs, cats, hamsters, whatever needs to be. Any particular type of therapy, I think that there is cognitive processing therapy. There's EMDR that's really great. Eye movement desensitization reprogramming. Narrative therapy. Meredith says, tell the narrative until one can share without running. Oh, yes. But I think if you are in therapy and you say to your therapist, look, I need to start working on some of this stuff. I need to unpack my backpack. She or he, excuse me, or they are likely going to be like, all right, here are some options. Here's what's available. What feels right for you? And be able to guide you through that. But yeah, you bring up the second point, explore your trauma if it's there and if you feel ready. Can you tell us a little bit more about EMDR? I am not certified in it, very interested in it, but it really is this process of connecting the brain to, well, it's all in the brain, but connecting brain, body, movement, all of that stuff into processing what you're saying. And so I'm not going to do it as much justice as I would like to do it, but it's when you are, my understanding, and any Corey or Meredith, you can jump in anytime, but if you are, looking at something and your eyes are moving like this, for some reason that I don't fully understand, I think it's magic, it becomes easier to talk about your trauma. And it's
Miller,
yes.
because I am trained in EMDR.
Yes, thank you, Meredith.
Okay, so when there's a trauma response, flight, fight, faint, freeze, it's like there's a traffic jam between your limbic system, your feelings, and your executive function. And there are too many cars on the freeway to get the information between these two parts of ourselves. So when there's this trauma response, you might process some of it, but that idea of the body keeps the score. So what Francine Shapiro started, she was having her own trauma experience, having cancer, getting a divorce, and she was watching ducks in front of her. And she noticed that she was thinking about the negativity, she was feeling it in her body, and she was watching these ducks walk back and forth. And she began to put two and two together, that when she moved her eyes right to left, she's engaging both parts of her brain to fully process the trauma. And then she started working with Vietnam vets, and it's taken off since then. But it's this idea of actually, through the movement of the eyes, because that's how it started. Now they do light bars and tapping and headphones. It's this idea of getting both parts of the brain through the movement of the eyes. And it's a very interesting, therapy. And one that I think is particularly good for folks who can't put words to what has happened. Mm-hmm. And they follow their eyes, and it's a check-in with the moment. What's happening now? Where are you now? How are you feeling now? So it's a very in the moment, step-by-step process.
Thank you so much. This is why I love Caron so much, because there's always, like, I don't know everything, obviously, but there's always people on campus who know so much. And so thank you. I appreciate you jumping in. But there are so many ways to explore your trauma if you're ready for it. And it could be something as simple, like I said, as doing some scribbles on a page and being like, this is how I feel right now. And something as big as engaging in therapy. Gabby says, I like how you describe how it feels to understand something, but your emotions don't and feelings don't match. Yeah, definitely. The other thing that I know we hear a lot in AA and Al-Anon, Families Anonymous, is secrets keep you sick. This was like drilled into my head as a child. So I feel like it's one thing that I will remember for the rest of my life. But secrets do keep you sick, you know, holding those things in. And that doesn't mean you need to tell everybody your business, but finding a safe place to unpack, to talk about, to put down your backpack and say, this is what's going on with me. Finding places to say, this is where I'm at, where you feel like you're not going to be judged or shamed, I think is really important. And then get to know your expectations and your resentments. Brene Brown says that expectations are just resentments in waiting, and or something along those lines. And I think that this is huge. So often we think that people can read our minds, and they can't. I used to have the biggest problem with this, and I realized I got it from my mom. But you know, there are times where I expect in my mind, I'm like, I'm going to walk in the door and my husband's going to clean the whole house and it's going to be great. I come home and I walk in the door and the house is not clean. And I find myself being like, oh, I never asked him to clean the house. I have no reason to assume that he, who also works full time, would have the time or the capacity to clean the whole house. It's just something in my brain that I think should happen. And then I get mad when it doesn't. And I think that's where we really have to dismantle those things. And that's a really small, minuscule example of this. But I think exploring the expectations that we have of other people, and then understanding that we either need to be very clear about our expectations of others, or we need to be very understanding with them. Expectation is predetermined resentment. Resentment is a prime offender for the addict. Absolutely. Expectations are premeditated resentments. Yes, yes. I love that. They really are. They really are. And I think it's okay to say, hey, look, this is what I need from you. This is what would be helpful for me. Is this possible? Is this something that you can do? It's so like, what I don't like about expectations is they also are kind of like this unspoken need that we have, right? We need something from somebody else, and we're so afraid to ask for it, or we don't want to ask for it, and then it becomes resentment. Meredith is going to talk about love languages next week, which is great because I think this ties right into this. So often in our relationships, we need words of affirmation or we need quality time, but we never say that we need those things. We never say it, and then we get upset about it. And so when we unpack our baggage, that's when we start to really understand what's going on. Old saying, manage your expectations. Yep, does work. Yeah, definitely. So I think that's one to keep coming back to, right? Because every day we could have new expectations and new resentments. And start to externalize, get it out there. I externalize a lot. I think that it can be helpful. Sometimes if I'm working with a client, I'll bring a chair into the room and I'm like, your mom is now here. Let's talk to her. And they look at me like I have 5 heads, and I don't blame them, but it works. Sometimes we do need that process of externalization. We need to put our trauma in the chair across from us and tell it to get somewhere. We need to put the resentments that we have on our table and say, look, guys, you got to get it together. Externalizing can be a really helpful tool. And next is find your people, rewrite the narrative. I also love Glennon Doyle. She's another one of my faves. And she says, you will be too much for some people. Those aren't your people. Oh, when I read that, I was like, oh my gosh, you will be too much for some people. Those aren't your people. There are so many places in this world where we are not going to be cherished and safe and thought to be the best person ever. And there are just as many places and just as many people who think that we will be and that we are, and who take us just as we are and love us for that. So really thinking about, where and with whom do I feel safe and supported? For some, it is with their spouse, it is with their family. For others, it's with their friends. I know a lot of different folks, especially around my age, who don't feel comfortable with their family, but they have this huge network of friends that fully support them and root for them and treat them like family. Pay attention to your boundaries, always be mindful of them. I do a lot of work on boundaries, and many of you have probably heard it, so I'm not going to get into all of that tonight because it is a talk, but really seeing, what am I trying to take responsibility for that maybe I shouldn't? Am I connecting and meeting my needs, connecting with and meeting my needs? And then the other part of this, which is pretty fun, is create new traditions and new patterns of behavior. So if you grew up in a very reactive household, kind of making it a ritual to say, I'm not going to make any major decisions for a whole 5 minutes. Like if I hear something from somebody, my job is to take a pause. For my husband and I, we often, we have these new traditions and rituals where we keep Sunday as like a day where we're just chilling out and doing our errands. We don't plan a bunch of stuff on that day. We aren't creating, I'm not in go, go, go mode all the time. And that's because I'm trying to keep that chaos at bay. I'm trying to plan for my week. I'm trying to show up for myself. So creating those new traditions and new patterns can be exciting, and it can also be daunting. Next is emotional regulation and self-soothing. So getting to understand your stress. What are your stress points? If we don't know what's broken, we can't fix it. So really understanding what causes your stress, when you're most likely to feel stressed. And this kind of goes back to the first point I had where, you're pulling back a little bit. You're starting to figure out what your patterns are. Gabby says boundaries. It's okay to distance yourself from some people to protect yourself. Many say that's selfish, but it's taking care of yourself first. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that sometimes boundaries do need to be big, and you need to distance yourself from people or things or whatever it is. And sometimes they don't have to look like that. Sometimes they can be smaller, but what matters is that you're honoring yourself. That is the biggest thing, is that you are honoring yourself. Glennon Doyle actually just came out with a new podcast called We Can Do Hard Things. And her podcast this week was all about boundaries, and I totally recommend it. It's a very good one. Back to emotional regulation and self-soothing. So finding ways to manage stress. It could be, I'm going to switch from caffeinated coffee to decaf coffee. Whatever, it could be something small, it could be something big, like I'm going to start exercising. It could also mean engaging your thinking mind. So are you reading for fun? Sarah Wilson is another person that I really admire in the world of writing books about things. And she talks a lot about how reading for long periods of time for enjoyment, like sitting down and reading for an hour, is super healthy for the brain. So things like that, crossword puzzles, but engaging your mind where you're like putting mental energy into something that's not like self-help related or like fixing things, something that's kind of outside of the realm of what you're usually doing. Thinking mind or best self. What does one's best self look like? Thinking mind or best self. What does one's best self look like? That's a good question. That's a good question.
So Taylor,
Yes.
the whole idea of best self, it comes from a dharmic perspective, right? So that there's no higher power, but they work towards being that best self. So engaging your thinking mind could also be seen as, okay, when was I my best self? When was I the most compassionate, loving, understanding, non-judgmental, and practice those things? You might not be able to do all of them, but if you can begin to work toward, let me be my best self in this moment, even if it's my best self is only 20%, can I be the best 20% that I can be? So what does best self look like? write it down, remember times when you felt great and you were at your best self, and then start to practice those little things.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's great. Yeah. So having that visualization, and then also being really, it sounds like being like kind and generous with yourself, you know, like what is my best version of myself, and what is the best version of myself right now? What is the best I can bring to the table right now? And can I allow myself to honor the fact that that is good enough? I think that's great. Glennon Doyle also talks about, she is sober. She wrote a book called Untamed. It's very good. And she talks about easy and reset buttons, and how so often we are so quick to hit the easy buttons, right? Whether it's like for me, it's like, I had a bad day, I'm gonna get ice cream. And then I eat ice cream and I feel like garbage. Those little things that we do, snarking, you know, sitting on the internet and just brooding and judging people. And, you know, it could be complaining incessantly, gossiping, whatever it is, hitting those easy buttons. And what we miss is that maybe we really need a reset button. Sometimes when I am at my most irritable, what I find is that really what I need is to drink some water. And Glennon Doyle spoke to that, and I was like, oh my gosh, she talks about how, like, you know, on those days where I think I need a new religion, a new spouse, a new house, new kids, new life, what I realize that I really need is just water. What I realize that I really need is just to be able to go walk outside in nature, to hug somebody, to journal a little bit. So finding those things that actually help us feel better. You know, and if it is ice cream, if ice cream actually makes you feel better, then that is awesome. But the majority of the time, what we really need is something much simpler. There was a post going on around, I think on Twitter, where a daughter called her mother and talked about this terrible day that she had. And her mom was like, well, why don't you grab a banana and go sit outside for a little bit and just take in the fresh air? I was like, man, that's great advice. And I think it's great advice because it's talking about reset buttons. And that's also inner and outer resources, right? So we know the things that we can do outside of us that can help us and support us and help us get to a place where we feel soothed. And we know the things inside of us that can help us. If that's doing some breath work, if it's, you know, doing some artwork, if it's dancing around, whatever it is that helps us.
Taylor,
yes.
Taylor, there's something called calm jars, where you take a ball mason jar, you take glitter, and you take clear glue. And you take hot water, clear glue, and glitter and put it into the ball mason jar. And so when you shake it, it's thick enough that the glitter slowly seeps to the bottom, or it's a timeout jar. And so you shake it and you wait until all the glitter has reached the bottom.
Yeah, those are awesome. Those are awesome. I love those. I used to at many of my old jobs when I worked with kids, I would see those around and be like, oh my gosh, I think I need one of those. And they're super helpful. And it's just like a quick thing that you can do that kind of gets your brain out of that chaos and into a little more calmness, just a little bit. This one, I laugh because when people tell me to lighten up, I get really annoyed, and here I am saying, lighten up, everybody. But again, Sarah Wilson, she says, you take a deep, free breath, expand a little, release your grip, and get on with better things. I think we do as a society and as people need to learn how to lighten up a little bit. We need to learn how to just breathe a little bit. I put the octopus here because Sarah Wilson's book, First We Make the Beast Beautiful, talks a lot about anxiety, and it's a really great book. I definitely recommend it. It's in the resources here. But what she talks about is, and what she means when she says, first we make the beast beautiful is that so often there's a Chinese proverb. Geez, I cannot talk all of a sudden. There's a Chinese proverb that says, you know, in order to conquer a beast, in order to really conquer it, we have to make it beautiful. We have to understand it. We have to be able to look at it and thank it for what it's given us. And her process is learning how to thank her anxiety and understand the strengths of her anxiety and internalize that. And so I think that we do have to kind of go through this process of making the lives that we have and all our backpack and everything really beautiful. We have to be able to look at it and say, man, this has been really hard and I'm thankful for it. I'm glad it's here. And that's a hard thing to do. And not everybody has the privilege of being able to do that. So I definitely want to recognize that. And I think that's our human condition, right? To be able to take a pause and look at our life and be like, that was a beautiful mess. Lightening up does have to do with making ourselves comfortable. I think that we miss this piece a lot. It's okay to know that on this journey of emotional sobriety can be really rocky and crazy, we might need a weighted blanket. We might need to have our favorite seltzer always stocked in our fridge. We might need to have, you know, a nice cardigan that we put on every now and then. But literally making ourselves comfortable is something that, as I was reading through everything, is very helpful in working through big emotions. When we feel like we can kind of put our guard down, take our backpack off our back, we're going to be more likely to open up a bit. This could also mean, I know in my office I have a bunch of different trinkets, but I have balls that guys can just like throw at the wall or throw at me if they want to. I mean, sometimes, you know, it could happen. But they have things that they can play with and they can feel like a little engaged and more comfortable and less sterile. And I think that's so important. Detach, that word. Detachment isn't like, I'm going to keep you at arm's length, our relationship is over. Detachment means like, I am responsible for myself, you are responsible for yourself. I am no longer taking on your problems. I'm not getting carried away with all of your wins. I'm going to stay in my lane. This is a practice. And again, it's just like, you know, it's just like everything I've talked about tonight, where we're pausing, right? We're pausing and saying, what am I in this moment responsible for? What am I supposed to respond to? And being able to learn how to slowly let everything else go. Another classic from my mother, Q-tip, or quit taking it personally. I put all of the annoying things I could think of on one slide. So quit taking it personally. So often I've found in life that we get so upset and so worked up about other people's reactions to us, that we start to believe all these false truths, right? About them, about us, about the world. And the reality is that reactions, as we know, don't really have anything to do with anybody else but the person reacting. If I'm a volcano, I'm going to explode whether or not somebody touches me or not. I'm going to explode. So learning how to quit taking it personally, extending the generosity to others of the fact that maybe what they're doing, their behavior might not have to do with us. So like with that gentleman in the car, I really had to like think Q-tip, Q-tip, Q-tip constantly. And remember like, hey, there's something up with him. People who are thriving and feeling really good don't cut somebody off in a yield lane and get on the highway and speed off. Something was going on. So I think when we start, Brene Brown talks about how when we start to get generous with the world around us, we get generous with ourselves and the world seems a little bit easier. Again, this is a practice. I'm not just going to be saying this and you're going to be like, great, I can't wait to be generous with everybody. It is a practice. Treat yourself to a regularly meeting support group, people who understand the pain and the journey. Absolutely. Absolutely. Talking with other people who get it and who can kind of not call you out, but help you understand, like, hey, were you reacting or responding in that moment? Was the person you were talking to, do you feel like they were reacting or do you feel like they were responding? And if you feel like somebody's reacting, then you can go, oh, probably wasn't personal. Sit with it and move. I think this is another Sarah Wilson thing. Sitting with these hard feelings, taking that pause and then moving your body. Sometimes I think we can get so worked up and we just like clam up where really we need to walk and we need to like count our steps and we need to be intentional with how we're walking, or we need to go for a hike, or we need to move in some way. We know that exercise is good for the mind. We know that. And oftentimes we choose not to do it. I know I'm very guilty of this. Gabby says, I completely respect when someone calls me out. So helpful for me. That's awesome. That is awesome. And that is so hard to get to a place where you're like, yes, call me out. I struggle with it. And so I think the fact that you're like, that is helpful and that is something that is good, that is incredible. And you should be super proud of yourself for that. And this last point, be gentle with yourself. Always remember as you're on this journey that you are a sacred being. You are sacred. And the experiences that you've been through are sacred. And your journey matters. It really matters. And it's okay to have days where you stumble and fall. It's okay to be a volcano sometimes. You're gonna be, everybody is. And what matters is that when you find yourself becoming that volcano, that you notice it. Notice it. Thank you, but only from those who I know are being helpful and not me. Absolutely. Thanks, Gabby, for clarifying. But yeah, so being gentle with yourself, holding yourself in high regard, or getting to a place where you feel comfortable holding yourself in high regard. Recognizing that you are important. That doesn't mean that you're self-important. That doesn't mean that you're self-righteous, but that you matter in this narrative, and that it's okay to treat yourself like a little child sometimes. I love inner child work. I think it's enormously helpful and crazy weird. But I think one of the things I've learned through that is that there are days where if little Taylor was here and I was set to take care of her, she would probably get taken away from me. I probably would not be able to care for her. And so I always come back to those moments and I say, what do you need? How can I be gentle with you today? What does sit with it and move mean? So that is the process of sitting with your feelings, holding them, not doing anything with them, just letting them exist, letting those emotions be, and then literally moving your body. Move your body in some way. This could be walking and kind of brooding through it, walking and brooding. It could be hiking. It could be riding a bike, whatever it is. Sarah Wilson talks a lot about it, and she says that she always walks when she finds herself in these intense moments where emotions seem to be flooding her, and that walking has been the best thing for her anxiety. I like Sarah Wilson, so I'm inclined to listen to her. Gabby says, put a picture of yourself when you were little on your mirror. Good reminder for me. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm going to open it up to questions in a moment, but I wanted to end with this poem by Mary Oliver, who's one of my favorite poets of all time. And I'll explain it after I read it. But the poem is called The Summer Day. And she said, who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean, the one that has flung herself out of the grass, the one who is eating sugar out of my hand, who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down, who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I don't know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Oh, I love this poem, and I love it because I think it really is a lesson in being present and observing. And I love the final question. What is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? And when I think about emotional sobriety, and when I think about this journey that we're all on together, I think about the power of being present and the power of always remembering that there's a bigger picture. We have this one wild and precious life, and it is going to be a journey that we have to strap in for, and it is amazing and beautiful. And in that, there's some messy things that we get through, but we're all so capable of it because we were given this opportunity. And I truly believe that. So I want to open it to any questions. We've got a little bit of time. So any questions, feel free to ask, and we will go from there. I should say any comments too, if anybody has any thoughts. And if there is nothing, if everybody is satisfied and feels good and peaceful, then I have done my job for the night. And Janie says, can you put the references back up, please? Yes. Grateful you and Karen doing that. Thank you. Thank you. Hi, Elizabeth. Thank you all. I really appreciate you being here. I know it's a Tuesday night. There's lots going on.
Thank you, Taylor. And I will send this out, send the recording as soon as it transfers onto my computer. So tomorrow morning, I should be able to get that out to everyone. And I would just thank everyone for signing on and joining us. So next week, we will reconvene for our final week. And like Taylor said, Meredith will be diving into the 5 love languages. And I believe everybody got their book. So hopefully you'll have had enough time to take a look at that and join us next Tuesday night, same time, same place. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye, good night.
Good night.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. Have a restful evening.
Thank you so much, Taylor. It was really wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wow. Are they?
Thanks, Taylor, and thanks, Meredith, for the explanation about EMDR. Really helpful. My son's about to start it down at Caron Renaissance, so I really wanted to know a little more. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. You're so welcome.
Thanks.
Hey guys, Meredith and Taylor, I experienced EMDR before I went to Caron, and what it did for me also was it took away when I would go back to some trauma that I had as a child, my father shunning me. Once I understood that and it came forth, when I thought back to those few memories, it didn't affect me the way it did before. Like it was like when I think back to it now, it doesn't hurt my heart like it did before. I understand it now. And that's what EMDR did for me also.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing. Desensitized. That's awesome.
There you go.
It
That's
did the
it.
job.